Well, good morning. We're into another new year, but there's still time to look back at what we experienced in 2025 and to think about what the year ahead could bring. Upper Michigan continues to face some challenges, and we'll explore those issues with Marty Fittante, the CEO of InvestUP, the lead regional economic organization for the Upper Peninsula. That conversation starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Marty, nice to have you with us.
Happy New Year, Don. Thank you.
I guess we could explain to our audience that we were going to have this conversation a little earlier, and then we got hit by that major blizzard, and it kind of wiped out our recording plans, and we had to make some other decisions, and you had some other things to get on too. But we're here, and we're not that far into the year. So let's kind of reminisce a little bit about the year past and maybe talk about some things that are ahead.
Sure.
2025 wasn't a banner year, was it?
No, I would agree. I think there were certainly some successes for the region, but there were certainly some misses, challenges, and losses. So, I think all in all, there were bumps along the way. But as you know, we're resilient people, mindful of SISU. And we're looking forward to what 2026 brings.
I was looking on your website, and you had some stats there that were kind of interesting, and we don't have to go over all these in detail, but it mentioned $9 million invested to grow and retain the workforce. That's a big investment.
It is, and we've been fortunate with the partnership that we've had with policymakers and the MEDC. Since this organization was formed in 2019, we've been the fiduciary of over $30 million. That's made real difference across the Upper Peninsula, just like that $9 million you referenced.
Okay, this also mentioned that $3.2 billion has been committed to infrastructure improvements, not just through InvestUP.
Correct.
In the UP.
Yeah, so we monitor kind of the 50 top projects going on. I think that number is actually closer to $5 billion.
Wow.
But of course, a big part of that's the SULOCs
Right.
and what's going on with the refurbishment of the lock.
Okay. You also had $212 million committed to developmental and exploration projects.
Yep, so you look at what's going on with things like RevX or Eagle Mine or Boulder Dash, Copperwood. There's that type of exploration taking place as well.
In some ways, 2025 could be remembered for some things that didn't happen. Doesn't mean they aren't going to happen, but that didn't happen.
That's right.
And certainly one of those was Copperwood, the mine in the western UP.
That's right.
A lot of effort was made to get $50 million to help provide some things needed in that area to make that project work. And it just didn't work out. What happened?
That's right. Well, at the end of the day, I think it's important to note that there was never a vote against Copperwood by policymakers. It passed the strategic fund twice unanimously. It passed the Michigan House twice with great bipartisan support. It just didn't get a vote in the Senate. And so, I think we made a strong case. I think we continue conversations to see where opportunity may lie. But independent of that, I think Copperwood's set up for success. They've got that letter of commitment from the Export-Import Bank on the federal side. And so they continue to look forward, move ahead, and now especially with the purchase by Conterra of 34% of the interest that Highland Copper had in the White Pine Mine. So that's another $30 million that really should expedite the construction process.
And again, this $50 million was not about mining, was it? It was about doing infrastructure things in the area that would support the project.
That's exactly right, and that's a really important distinction, and it was really for the benefit of the community at large.
Okay. Did it get caught up in just some of the politics? The rancor between the House and the Senate and leadership and things like that?
I don't know if we ever got real great insight in terms of why there wasn't a vote in the Senate. I think, we can speculate. There certainly was some tension between the House and the Senate that didn't help not only our project, but many. So I think that could well have been part of it. But at the end of the day, I don't think we had a great answer in terms of what really happened with our inability to get a vote there.
Okay. Another issue is the electric units, the so-called RICE units. Legislation passed in the House that would make those units continue to be able to serve our area. never got through the Senate. What's the outlook there?
I think, if what I hear from the UP delegation is accurate, I think there's lots of optimism that that will eventually pass. They were poised to pass in December. It was less than perfect, I think. And then on the day that the vote was to be taken in the Senate, the Public Service Commission issued a ruling that really took pressure off of policymakers and said, we don't need to pass this today. And so I think they paused and they'll revisit it, which at the end of the day may be a good thing, because I think from the perspective of many, that was less than perfect solution, because the Board of Power and Light was not part of that fix.
And of course, this would have a big impact on the number of UPCO customers, also a big impact on the Tilden mine, which can have a big economic impact on this area.
Yeah, especially on the mine. And that's, a big part of the concern is what does that mean for the longevity of the mine, which is such a critical employer, not only to Marquette County, but the Upper Peninsula.
Okay. One of the big issues for the past several years, and it certainly affects the UP, but it was also a state issue, was population and the fact that Michigan was lagging the rest of the country. Governor appointed a special study group, task force, named a growth officer. A number of things were done. That officer has since left. But are we making any progress on population?
Yeah, I think we have made some progress. When we look at it regionally, we've had the opportunity to see growth in the Upper Peninsula. 10 of 15 counties across the UP have actually seen growth over the course of the last 3 years. The real concern for us, though, is the nature of the growth. And we're still not growing where we would suggest we really need to be growing. And that's that prime-aged working population, so 21 to 49 maybe.
Right.
So we're seeing growth, but it's probably on that far end with retirees. Retirees are great, but we really need, if we're going to have a robust workforce.
And that number keeps getting bigger, doesn't it?
It does.
Number of retirees.
That's exactly right. You look at, we've done some research around that. You look back to 1970, there were roughly 4 kids for every senior in every county across the Upper Peninsula at that time. Now, at best, it's 1 child below 18. To every senior.
I want to talk more about population, but we have to take a break.
Sure.
Be back with more questions for Marty after we take this 2-minute break. Again, my guest this morning is Marty Fittante, the CEO at InvestUP. We were talking about population, and I guess there's no magic to it, but there are a number of factors, I think, and certainly jobs is one of them. People have to have a job if they're going to live in a place. But we are learning that there's more to it than that, aren't we? That creating livable communities is important.
Yeah, I think that's a really critical point, Don. I think the Grow Michigan Together Council, and we were disappointed to see that the legislature didn't fund that this year. I think that's a miss from our perspective. But one of the things they concluded was vitality and having a dynamic community is really important to drawing that younger population. So things like the water that we have, like the trails that we have, are really critical. And then alongside that, you need kind of those foundational pieces, childcare, housing. We also learned that air service is something that really matters.
And I think some basic things, I was listening to a report on the radio this morning, actually, that not here, but in this country, on average, people are waiting 26 days to see a primary care physician.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's important if you have communities that can provide that service. But I was talking with someone, and it goes beyond that. It's getting harder to find a dentist. It's getting harder to find a veterinarian in the UP in certain communities.
You're absolutely right.
Those things I think are important to people too.
Absolutely matter. And that's part of the reason, like Copperwood as an example, is so important. Gogebic County now lost its maternity delivery.
Right.
And so, what young woman, mother is going to be comfortable when you've got to travel 50 miles to deliver a baby? So those services are really critical and foundational to having the opportunity to draw that prime age population.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's just, you kind of wonder where it's all going to go. Some of the other things that have gone on this year, I think it's a positive thing. We saw the Eagle Mine acquisition by Talon, or it's in the process.
Yeah.
That sounds like a positive development.
We think it's an important strategic partnership between the two of them provides real opportunity. I think a marriage that's really well made with, Lundine's strength around mining itself and with Talon's strength around exploration. And it begs the question, what does that mean to that Boulder Dash discovery? And so could that be an extension of Eagle at some point in terms of what they've done so well here for a number of years now?
And of course, you mentioned RevX, and that was a $145 million grant. Is that still moving forward?
So it's got a bit of a bump. When we talked about those bumps from 2025, the legislatures, I think the House acted to rescind $645 million in work projects. One of those was a $50 million grant that was a complement to draw down the $145 million that you just referenced. That $145 million is federal money. So the $50 million was a commitment from the state, and so now that'll go back before the legislature. So the RevX team is working hard to make that case at this point to the legislature.
One of the negatives this year was down in Marinette, where Fincantieri lost part of its naval contract. Nothing to do with its performance, but
correct.
Just new decision about what kind of vessels they want, I guess.
Yeah, that Constellation class, they lost that contract now with the government. But in talking to their leadership team, I think they feel they're in a really good position to keep their skilled workforce. I think they'll lose maybe a few white-collar jobs at the end of the day. Really important for us, though, because although they're Wisconsin-based, 42% of that workforce comes from Michigan. So they feel pretty confident at the end of the day that they'll be able to weather with some changes and different focus that skilled workforce that's so important.
Speaking of creating jobs and economic development, it sounds like Lansing has kind of changed its mind about the right way to do that. A couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, they established the SOAR Fund, provide major grants to certain companies that were promising certain development. Apparently they want to head in a different direction. Is that a good decision?
Well, I think, we saw some benefit from SOAR here. I understand some of the heartburn that policymakers, bipartisan, had around SOAR. I think the bigger concern for us right now is there doesn't seem to be any direction with economic development tools, and to compete with other states, we need those tools. In fact, the speaker came out a week or two ago and said, in light of some of that tension that you referenced earlier, economic development is not a priority for the House in the moment. So I think one of the really important things is, what will the next administration, we're going to elect a new governor, what's going to be the focus and the push from the new administration around economic development tools? Because we definitely need some tools that we can take advantage of to try to facilitate job opportunity.
Okay, we'll talk about that future and who the next governor might be. Well, maybe not who the next governor might be, but the fact that we're going to choose one. After we take a break for these important messages. Again, my guest this morning is Marty Fittante, the CEO of InvestUP. Before we leave economic development, one of the other positive developments locally was the Able medical device. And it's kind of interesting. I don't think we've become the Silicon Valley of medical devices, but we have a number of these developments in this area.
3 in Marquette County,
right.
4 in the Upper Peninsula. So we've got a really strong cluster and sector around advanced manufacturing and medical device manufacturing. And that's really important in terms of what that type of synergy brings. So excited by that. And, the story of the Silicon Valley talks a lot about just location.
Well, and, I think getting employees is always important to these companies. Depending on universities is an important part of that. And I believe they've been supportive in these issues.
That's exactly right. They got a great partnership with Northern, and I think it reflects why Northern, Michigan Tech, and Lake State, as well as the community colleges, are really so important to that conversation around population and keeping that working, that primary age population here. It's part of the reason, Don, that we believe internships are part of how we go to solve for that.
Yeah. Okay. Election year coming up, and people say, well, midterms, no president. In Michigan, it's a big election.
It's historic.
It's about as big as you can get without a president.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're electing all of our state officers, the governor, the attorney general, secretary of state, even a U.S. senator. So that's going to keep us, our attention focused on what's coming up.
First time in Michigan history that we've had an open seat for U.S. Senate and we'll be electing a governor in the statewide offices in the
Really?
same election. So
Okay.
it's never happened before.
Okay.
So it's truly historic.
And we should point out that the Secretary of State and Attorney General, those candidates will be nominated by the convention, not
Correct.
selected in a
Yep.
primary.
Yep.
But in all the other races, it will be the primary. Of course, the whole Michigan legislature is also up for election.
Yes. Yep. So you got the balance of power hanging in both the House and the Senate, very close. I think you'll see a fair amount of interest in the 109th district. You know, Representative Bonek won as a Republican for the first time since 1955.
Right.
You know, fairly close election, so that's definitely going to be one of those seats that they target. A Lansing paper, Gondler, suggested that'd be the 6th most likely seat to flip.
There also will be an open seat in the 108th, since Representative Preston is running for the 38th Senate seat,
That's
which
right.
is an open seat.
That's right. Yep. So you'll have, I think, lots of advertising on TV6 in the coming year, but it'll definitely be an election that will shape policy in many ways, as I'd mentioned earlier, including around economic development.
In those big local races, the 38th Senate, we are getting some strong candidates lined up on both sides of the political aisle.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting primary on the Republican side in particular, right? That seat has continued to trend more and more Republican. So you've got a former legislator in Beau Lefebvre and then a sitting legislator in the 108th and Dave Preston. The districts are different than when Lefebvre served to when Preston is served. But it will be interesting between the two of them, both seasoned politicians, and bring, I think, very different personalities and approaches to that campaign.
And of course, Greg Markinen will be up for re-election in the 110th, and that's not an open seat, but he's now one of the beneficiaries, I guess you could say, of the new term limits, in that you can serve all of your time in either the House or Senate, and this will be an opportunity for him to do that.
That's right. He'd be reelected to his 5th term,
Right.
which we haven't seen since term limits in the early 90s. Legislator serving in one office in the Upper Peninsula. So he definitely has become accustomed to what's required. He's sitting on appropriations, which is so important. I talked about those work projects that got cut. I think it was that experience that helped him save a really important development in Hancock, $4.6 million that the state was going to invest in it, and he was able to save that. So really critical.
We're almost out of time. What's the big challenge for Upper Michigan this year?
From my perspective, the Census Revenue Conference just came out and estimates that there's going to be $1 billion hole in the state budget, both this year and next year. And so I think the message from that is we have to own our own destiny. And so it's going to require all of us to come together and really figure out how we find capital to advance opportunities in the Upper Peninsula.
And we'll be fixing the roads in the UP, hopefully, based on what happened in the last budget.
Yes, in fact, that's the reason, part of the reason, a big reason for that budget hole is the change in tax policy in the state. So the economy continues to do pretty well, so it's not really based upon the economy, it's based upon tax change.
Okay. Well, let's hope it will be a good year in Upper Michigan.
Amen. We're looking forward to it, excited by it, and we think as we close this year, there'll be lots to celebrate.
Okay. Thanks for coming in and talking about it.
Thank you, Don. Always appreciate it.
I'll have some other thoughts for you in just 2 minutes. I've told the story before that when I was a kid, in the days before television, I was a big radio fan, and my dream was to be a radio announcer. Well, that opportunity came when I was in high school, and truth be known, I was so excited to get the job, I probably would have worked for nothing. Fortunately for me, there was a minimum wage, so I was making 75 cents an hour. That doesn't sound like much, but to a kid in high school, it put real money in my pocket. With the hours I worked, it gave me enough money to buy my first car. It was a 1954 Plymouth, which probably sold for about $2,000 when it was new, and it was 2 years old when I bought it. I can't remember the price, but I'm pretty certain it was in the area of $600. That might get you a set of tires today. In any case, the minimum wage went up to $1 an hour in 1956, and I thought I was on easy street. There's debate about the minimum wage. Some argue that when we increase the minimum wage, prices go up, so we really don't gain anything. The idea of a minimum wage began with the federal government. The first U.S. minimum wage was 25 cents an hour, and it took effect in 1938, just about when I was born. Over the years, it has increased 22 times. Today, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. It's not changed since 2009. The federal rate applies across the country, but if a state or city has a higher minimum wage, that higher rate must be paid. While many states do have a higher minimum wage, there are about 20 where the federal rate still applies. The news today is that Michigan has a new minimum wage. As of January 1st, the minimum increased to $13.73 per hour as part of the state's plan to reach $15 an hour by 2027. The new rates also raised the tip minimum wage to $5.49 per hour. Increases also occurred in many other states, including those with a higher rate than Michigan. The state of Washington has the highest rate at $17.13 an hour. In New York, it's $17 or $16, depending on where you live. The higher rate does apply in New York City. Connecticut is right behind at $16.94 an hour. Well, as we all deal with inflation and the never-ending increase in the cost of living, it's fun for me to think back to the days when I was thrilled to be working on the radio and excited to be making 75 cents an hour. I'll be back in a minute. Well, our time is about up for another week. The Today Show with Willie Geist will be along in just a couple of moments. Remember, you can also watch our show on the internet at uppermichigansource.com and streaming on TV6 Plus on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV. Thanks to Marty Fittante for coming in this morning so we could reminisce about 2025 and look ahead to 2026. And thank you for tuning in. Hope to see you again next Sunday morning.